Hello,
So
world.
we are here tonight with Sarah, obviously, but then our friend Dr. Shaun Blanchard out of now Sydney, Australia. Shaun, I'm not going to read your bio. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm from Chapel Hill, North Carolina originally. I went and did a master's at Oxford with the Dominicans at Blackfriars College, and I met a wonderful Australian woman there. We got married. I did my doctorate at Marquette University up in Milwaukee, not far from Sarah. And we taught for many years in South Louisiana, and then an opportunity arose to go back to Australia, back to where my wife is from. So we took that, and now we both teach at the University of Notre Dame, Australia, and I teach in theology. She teaches English and philosophy. So yeah, I do a lot of work on early modern Catholicism, so 16, 1700s, and then some more contemporary stuff, Vatican II, contemporary popes. Ecclesiology probably is the main sort of theological theme. So, yep, that's me.
And Jansenism, Shaun. You
Oh
always talk
yeah,
about
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Jansenism.
The early modern stuff is Enlightenment, Jansenism. Yeah, I'll try to not bring up Jansenism in this discussion because I don't think it's.
Huh.
I always say I'm not going to, and then I find some sort of opening. So
Uh, Shaun, it's great to have you. Yeah, it's good to see folks joining us. Yeah, we're excited to talk about the last four Wednesday audiences, with Pope Leo continuing to go through his catechesis of the documents of Vatican II, and then we'll probably touch on some of his Holy Week homilies that were quite fantastic. But yeah, maybe we'll start. It is in the octave of Easter. Sarah, how was your Easter in Triduum?
Oh, I wish I had more to say. It was busy. It was I didn't really get to attend any liturgy because we have small kids and it's just not workable at this season of life to try to take my kids to the Easter vigil. So yeah, it and honestly, like I Easter Sunday for me was a little bit of a challenging day just for different personal reasons. It was kind of like it was a harder day, but I think that it was a really moving experience to sort of be like, yeah, Lord, like the resurrection is real and it doesn't necessarily fix everything right now. It doesn't make all of the pain go away. It doesn't fix everything magically in my life, but it's still real and it's still this like active force kind of underneath all of that. So I think I was able to sort of like experience the like veiled resurrection a little bit on Easter, but yeah, I wish I had more profound things to say, but it was just kind of like life, parenthood, marriage, family, chaos.
That sounds about right with young kids. Let me think. Just a few years ago, so our youngest is 3 and our oldest is 13. So we're out of the like everyone needs all of our attention all the time phase to only some of them need our attention all the time phase. Um, and we've split up the Triduum liturgies because even though Christina and I like going to all of them, like one of us will go to one, like Thursday, and one will go to Friday, and then the kids who want to join will go. And then
It's
that has made things more enjoyable rather than dragging all the kids to all the things because
Yeah.
that just makes everyone miserable.
Yes. Yes.
How
I
was
like that approach.
how was Easter in Australia, Shaun?
good. I find Christmas somewhat disorienting because it's so hot, and it's the middle of summer, but it feels about like the right weather and temperature, maybe for like a Louisiana Easter or a North Carolina Easter, definitely not a Minnesota or Michigan Easter. So there's something sort of comforting about that. But yeah, well, there's a local parish that Anne Marie and I have been going to called St. Patrick's. It's a lot of the strength of the Australian church is there's movements, there's like immigrant communities that are obviously strong, and then there's parishes based around schools. and there's two kind of youngish priests running this parish, and they're very, just really sincere, and they seem really balanced, and the people, it's kind of a, come one come all type parish, so there's plenty of distractions during all the masses and strange things going on, but it's a really beautiful, it's a really beautiful kind of here comes everybody vibe that we sort of prefer to, whenever possible, just go to a normal parish and don't try to seek some sort of special curated experience apart from the messiness of life. So no, beautiful. We really enjoyed it, and we're finally able to have Easter celebrations with my wife's family, who are just down the road rather than the other side of the world. So that's a really beautiful thing.
That's cool. Okay, I think we're rolling now. Folks are
Rolling.
here. We can jump into the catechesis. So yeah, we'll go back to Wednesday, March 18th is the first one, and in a nutshell, this catechesis is looking at the people of God, really focusing on both the baptismal priesthood and then the role of, or the gift of Christ. Man, I forget the phrase of it, but so being baptized priest, prophet, and king, it focuses on priest and prophet. Actually doesn't talk about king at all in this catechesis, but it focuses on those two. First focusing on the royal priesthood of all of the baptized, and then focusing on the sense of the faithful. With it, Sarah, I think when you read this, when it first came out, you texted me and you were like, Paul, what does the sense of the faithful mean?
Yes.
And I'm like, I don't really know. It sounds like a tautology. And then you're like, yeah, that sounds exactly right.
Maybe we should ask our friend Shaun.
Hey, Shaun, what?
Yeah, we talked about this recently, Paul, didn't we? In relation to the John Henry Newman,
in the podcast that's going to come out in 2 weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
So, one thing that, I mean, I can answer the question, but I want to point to something that Pope Leo said that struck me, and I think kind of helps avoid some of the misinterpretations that people might have. So it's the last sentence of, it's kind of the middle-ish paragraph there. The paragraph begins, the Council Fathers then teach that the holy people of God also participated in the prophetic mission of Christ. And he's citing Lumen Gentium 12, which is the passage that has sense of the faith. So there's sense of the faith, sensus fidei, and there's sense of the faith of the faithful, which is clunky, but are as faithful, the faithful meaning the baptized, right? So it's actually not just the laity. We often talk about the sense of the faithful as the laity. Its vast majority is laity, but it is actually the entire people of God, right? So anyway, the final sentence of that paragraph, he quotes from the Acts, like the minutes of Vatican II, Acta. And then he says, the sense of faith therefore belongs to individual believers, not in their own right, but as members of the people of God as a whole. And I think that's really important in the sense that, so like Paul's sense of the faith is not important because Paul is like an adult male landowner who has a right to be represented at the parliament, or something like that, right? It's important because Paul is a member of the people of God. Because of Paul's baptism, that's why it's important. And whatever gifts he has are good and are relevant, but fundamentally it's because of his baptism, right? And its participation. I mean, sense of the faithful is, I think it's similar to what we were talking about, Paul, with conscience, in the sense that you can kind of malform your sense of the faithful, right? So like the example I used with the sense of the faithful is, my wife is very smart, and she goes to mass and she prays and all this stuff, but she's not theologically educated. She doesn't have technical theological education. But if I present something to her and I say sort of, how does this sit with you? Whatever it might be, this devotional thing or this, I use the example of the prayers for the Jewish people in the various forms of the Mass. I was using this to teach development of the Catholic relationship with the Jewish people. And she just like perfectly articulated the kind of theological worldview behind each and how it sort of sat with her on the basis of her catechesis and her understanding of Catholic teaching, and just a sort of perfect, simple explanation, right? But if you're listening to tons of Nick Fuentes every day, that's going to warp your sense, right? Like just like your conscience, whatever you're imbibing, you can then actually warp and distort. Conversely, through healthy friendships, through good spiritual direction, through all the good things available to Catholics, you can sort of sharpen your sense of the faithful as well. But I suppose I haven't actually answered what it is. I mean, it's a let me just quote. I'll quote the acta that Pope Leo quotes. He says it is like, or sorry, the acta. So this is a speech at the Second Vatican Council, is like a faculty of the whole church by which she in her faith recognizes the revelation handed down, distinguishing between true and false in matters of faith, at the same time penetrates it more deeply and applies it more fully in life. So I think it's closely related to conscience. It's also related to doctrinal development. So, the Imagen Dei Verbum about Mary hiding these things in her heart. I mean, that's a sense of the faith.
Yeah.
At a very high level, of course.
So one thing that comes to mind, and it connects to earlier in this catechesis. So he talks about the baptismal priesthood and the royal priesthood. And it reminds me of one of my favorite lines from Pope Paul VI in an address he gives when he promulgates the new liturgy. He says, and I pulled up the quote. Let me see if I have it here. Yeah, he says, so he's talking about the reasons for the reform of the liturgy. And he says, the other reason for the reform is this renewal of prayer. It is aimed at associating the assembly of the faithful more closely and more effectively with the official rite, that of the Word of God and that of the Eucharistic sacrifice. For the faithful are also invested with the royal priesthood, that is, they are qualified to have supernatural conversations with God. So there's this real sense of, because of my baptism, and specifically this baptismal priesthood, I'm able to have supernatural conversations with God. And that's directly connected to conscience, right? Because conscience is this innermost place in me where I'm able to hear God's voice. So we're talking about baptism somehow empowering my conscience in some way so I can hear the Lord's voice. Now, someone who's not baptized also has a conscience, and we believe also can hear the Lord's voice, but the church must be speaking to something qualitatively different here. But then also that quote you just read, Shaun, where it says the sense of faith is like a faculty of the whole church by which she recognizes the revelation handed down to her, distinguishing between true and false in matters of faith. That sounds almost exactly what the Catechism says about conscience, where it says it's our capacity to recognize the moral law and discern between true and false, right and wrong. So is this like a sense of, this is just the voice of God operating within both individual baptized people and then also within the body of the people of God as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, I think to it's analogous, right? I mean, it's not a perfect one-to-one, but it is like a kind of ecclesial conscience or consciousness, but about kind of matters of the faith. And I think it can be hard. I think it's really important in this phase of human history where we have such extraordinary technological ability and AI and access at our fingertips to, I mean, thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of times the amount of information that a cathedral canon in Paris with one of the best libraries in the world had, 600 years ago, right? I mean, a 12-year-old on their smartphone on the train right now has access to more text than, the Great Library of Alexandria, right? So because of that, I think preserving the idea that, the young woman praying her rosary or the old man doing the Stations of the Cross or whatever, there is an experiential knowledge in the Catholic faith that is not, strictly speaking, intellectual. It's not intellectual in the sense that it is simply information that one can either digest or not, or agree or disagree. And I think in our age of kind of internet apologetics, which is much of it is well-meaning, but that's really, really important. That you actually, there is a growth that occurs just by doing these things repeatedly in community. And I think that's something that the Catholic faith in particular has to offer to kind of postmodern humans that are searching for, or whatever we are, postmodern, but we're searching for this groundedness. And the groundedness can't just come from like winning arguments on the internet, right? it needs to come from like walking a path. And that's why it's closely linked. I mean, synodality with conscience, with sense of the faith, and with doctrinal development all being, I think, very tightly linked.
Yeah.
And discernment, that seems like another concept that seems to be very linked in. Now, this quote, though, from Lumen Gentium has always bugged me. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know if it's original to Lumen Gentium, about how the entire body of the faithful cannot err in matters of belief when they, when from the bishops down to the last of the lay faithful, they show universal agreement in matters of faith and morals, which makes me want to LOL, because like, when has that ever happened? Like, with anything? Like, is there a single thing that the entire church, from the bishops all the way down to the last of the lay faithful, show agreement on? So I have never known what to do with that, because it just seems like, what use is that? Because it's not reality. So I don't know. Can you help me understand this one? Because this is why I sent Paul a long and rambling voice memo right after I read this.
I'm glad someone else does that to Paul. It's not just me. Paul, what we talked about this as well, didn't we? I don't know if we gave a totally satisfactory answer, because I mean, to be perfectly honest, I would at the very least agree that it can be completely misunderstood and put in a kind of Catholics sometimes get to this point where they talk in such idealistic terms about the church that you have to be like a really starry-eyed insider to have any clue what they're talking about.
Yeah, I feel like
it's a problem. I agree. Yeah.
No, totally. I feel like there's three possible interpretations of this. The first one is that literally everybody has to agree on something for us to know, like at the same time, kind of like take a snapshot of the whole church. What do we all agree on? And then that's the sensus fidei. That seems ridiculous, and I think you can rule it out just kind of right away. And then the second option would be like, only specific people are qualified to exercise the sensus fidei. And so this kind of like invisible church within the church discerns the sensus fidei. And those are the people who are, who have like the true sensus fidei, who have a cultivated palate for truth. Yeah.
A secret knowledge, maybe?
Yeah, a sort of Gnostic.
I was going to bring it. That was going to be my entry point into bringing up Jansenism, but I'm not going to. Let's blame Gnosticism instead. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll blame everything on Gnosticism, frankly. But I think the third one, and the one that seems possible, at least plausible to me, and maybe this is my limited imagination, and maybe there's a fourth option that's actually true, but the third option is sort of a looking at the discernment of the church not as a snapshot in time, but as an experience that takes place over time and through history. So obviously things take a lot of time as the church kind of works out, what do we believe about the incarnation and the nature of Christ and human nature and how we treat each other and justice and the common good and things like that. Who is Mary? Who are the saints? And those things take time. So you obviously can't just arbitrarily choose a moment in time where you say like, well, here it is. Or even looking at just right now. So am I kind of on the right track there, that it's sort of an ongoing discernment, and it's never something you can just kind of put your thumb down and go, all right, we did it. We found it. It's all here. But rather that there's an unfolding, and that seems to align more with a kind of Newman approach to development of doctrine, that there's this organic growth over time and it's not static, it's kind of in flux and in process, and we don't have the whole picture at any given point because we're limited. Am I just saying obvious things that everybody knows except me?
No. It's a challenging thing.
It's interesting. The way you said that, I hadn't thought of it, but I'm thinking of myself. So like, not the body of Christ, but like the body of Paul. Thinking about me throughout my lifespan. I mean, who I was 10 years ago would not be in agreement with who I am today on some things, right? And I imagine who I am in 10 years is not going to be in total agreement with, all of me today. But even in the present moment, like in some of my work as a therapist, I talk about like parts work, and we talk about this almost organically, right? On Easter Sunday, there was a part of me that wanted to eat another handful of jelly beans. And there was a part of me that was like, I probably shouldn't do that, right? We um
Probably.
even in that moment, all of the body of Paul was not in agreement. um so there's a sense where it can't be just a snapshot. It has to be something more organic. Anyways, yeah, I'm not sure if that's helpful, but I hadn't ever thought of it as not a snapshot, but as something
It's
almost.
kind of like I was just talking to a friend last night about scripture, and forgive me if this doesn't come out the way I want it to, but we were talking about violence in the Old Testament and what to do with that, how to interpret that. And she was making the argument, and I found it compelling, and that the Old Testament doesn't necessarily accurately depict God's will perfectly when God tells the people of Israel, "Hey, go in there and kill everybody and don't leave anybody alive." We know in retrospect, having received the new covenant, that that's not in alignment with who God in his essence actually is. So, but there's this kind of way that we can see it as provisional and also reflecting an imperfect knowledge that we have of what God was doing at the time and what he wanted at the time. And that, to me, that made a little bit of sense. Like, and then you pull it back into the present when we look at the sensus fidei in the church as a process instead of as sort of a like set of beliefs or propositions, like a bundle of beliefs, but rather as a process that's ongoing as we learn more and more about the meaning of the gospel and the meaning of revelation and what it means for us now and what is the good news for this time and this place and these people. That you see kind of the development, the imperfectness of what came before. Yes,
Yeah, I think that
I solved
looking
it.
at
No, no.
Paul and I once had a discussion precisely about what you raised with scripture, and how as Catholics we often we have like pretty good catechesis, not always of like Catholics will struggle and be like, oh, I can't remember which gospel that's in or which letter. Like we're not as good as Protestants are at drawing out chapter and verse. But I do think when Catholics are plugged in to the liturgy and to like the education you can get at parishes and things, we do have a pretty good kind of hermeneutic of scripture. And I think it arises kind of naturally from the liturgy, right? Like when you read when you read about like the serpent in the desert on the pole, and then immediately it's Christ talking about that same episode, and you're like, oh, that's really important symbolic foreshadowing, and there was this sort of like darkness and obscurity and then clarity, and I think that Catholics sort of innately get that. And we do it also with the moral development. I mean, I remember I was actually raised Protestant, and I remember sitting in Bible studies and being like, "Oh no, God commanded to annihilate the Amalekites? Like that's horrifying." And there were always people in the Bible study that were like, "We have to accept that, and like if God tells you to do something, you need to do it." And I was just thinking, I had this vivid imagination. I thought, "Oh my God, I can't imagine that anyone was ever in a position where murdering women and children was obedience or disobedience to God. That's horrifying." And now, of course, Protestants have their own, disagreements in hermeneutical ways of reconciling this. But in the Catholic Church, people are usually quite happy to say, hang on a second, this is a pedagogical unveiling of who God is that
Mhm.
reaches its fulfillment in Christ, right? But we don't often do that with the magisterial statements of the church. We often get really freaked out when we see something in an ecumenical council or a statement of a pope that strikes us as, well, obviously wrong. Like how could we ever have spoken this way about Jews? Or how could we say everyone outside the church will be damned and all this kind of stuff, right? But there is a hermeneutical process also with that. So I think this doesn't completely solve the problem that you're pointing to, Sarah, and the Synod is also struggling with exactly what you articulated. But the infallibility of the sensus fidei, or the whole people of God, has the same basic hermeneutical problems as the infallibility of a council or the infallibility of the Pope. I think that we have to kind of move those statements more into how we read Scripture, where there's a kind of unveiling process that the ultimate arbiter of all of it is Christ and how close it conforms to Christ. So I think like papal magisterial statements can be and have been sort of revised and restated. So like if like Pope Leo will when Pope Leo speaks about salvation outside the church is a good example, because like most people agree with it and they can see a development on it. But the way that he speaks now is going to be profoundly different to the way a pope spoke in the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries. We still want to say papal infallibility of councils, and also infallibility of the whole people of God is real and is fundamental to the Catholic faith. But I just think we have to switch it into a kind of pedagogical unveiling, right?
The phrase that comes to mind also from Vatican II is that we're a pilgrim people. There's a sense of we're still journeying, like that. No, there isn't a definitiveness until the end. We're always growing and always learning more. Not that everything is therefore relative or meaningless, or that words don't matter, but that we also have to recognize that we are a pilgrim people. We are still growing.
It just strikes me as very, I don't know what the right word is, like, not scandalous. Yeah,
I
it's
thought you could say tautology, because that's what Paul said. Like, well, it's true if we all think it's true and no one disagrees, and then it's like, well, I guess it's, it's like a easy but meaningless concept, right?
Yeah. No, thank you for thinking so highly of me that I would use the word tautology. I was thinking more hard was the word that I was thinking. Tough. I don't understand. No, it's challenging to this idea, an intention with the idea that the church is, which we have all heard said about the Catholic Church, that is the true church and has the fullness of truth. That seems to be what you just said seems to sort of relativize what that means, or it puts it more into context, what it means to say the church has the fullness of the fullness of revelation and the fullness of truth, if you will. I don't know why I use scare quotes, but because it's not this, when we talk about the deposit of faith, it's not this chest full of antiques that we just hand from one person to the next, and it remains like the same 8 objects are in there from one as it changes hands over the years. It's this growing thing. But I'm sure both of you have encountered it just as much as I have, that there is this sense among a lot of Catholics that, well, no, because we have the fullness of revelation, it would be somehow scandalous for us to admit that we were wrong, or that we needed to update.
Yeah. That we actually have to grow. But that's assumed in the documents of the council. It's assumed that the church has to walk the way of penance and renewal. It's assumed that revelation will continue to unfold. It's assumed that we made mistakes in the past and need to do better in the future. All of that's taken as a given in the church's understanding of itself at the council.
One other thing I wanted to add on sensus. I think with sensus fidei, like if we try to answer a question like why do Catholics why do we have the relationship that we have to like relics or icons or tangible devotional aids, right? The highest form being sacraments, which are special signs and mediators of grace and things. But you can say, oh, it's because this pope said this thing in this encyclical about interpreting a passage in St. Paul or the gospel, or the second, Nicaea II. So like if a Catholic YouTuber was arguing with a Protestant YouTuber, he'd be like, Nicaea II clearly, teaches this, and it's infallible for this reasons about the icon controversy. And that's all true, but the real reason is because centuries and centuries of Catholics have related to the bones of saints, to paintings of Mary, to statues of Jesus, to holy water, to rosary beads in a certain way. And that has now been sort of subsumed into the bloodstream of Catholicism. That's why, at the most fundamental level, my wife doesn't know anything about Nicaea II, but you could never convince her that rosary beads are idolatry, or that that kneeling in front of a statue is pagan worship, or because that's the work that the Sensus Fidei does in my mind.
That's great. Yeah.
I don't think it's a different kind of infallible knowledge to the Pope saying there's been a debate about whether Mary was immaculately conceived, and I am resolving that debate now under these terms. But even when he did that, he did say, he wrote every bishop in the world, and he said, do your people believe in this? Do you believe in it? Do you think it's prudent that I define it? So even the most of the kind of more authoritarian-minded popes, the reason that it was opportune and definable rather than just like a theological opinion, which it had been for many, many centuries, right? I mean, going back to maybe the 7th or 8th century. But the reason it was eminently definable was because it had now had over a millennium of Sarah's and Paul's and Shaun's doing it, if you will.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I see that. That's, I think, a good way to see it. Whereas there are really, really bad ways to misunderstand this coming from quote unquote right or quote unquote left. I mean, the danger of the select few. That's a real danger. And again, I won't go on a Jansenism tangent, but that's basically what their argument was, well, the good Catholics don't accept this papal bull. And they meant less than 10% of Catholics, but they're the good Catholics. And I can show you how they're the good Catholics, and the miracles are occurring in our Protestant sects will do this as well. But you can also make it a kind of progressive democratization where it's one man, one woman, one vote. But it's not. It's because Sarah is part of the people of God that she has a sense, not because she's an emancipated modern woman, or not because Paul has a degree in psychology. Like, that's not why your opinion matters. It matters because you're baptized and you pray and you're part of a believing community.
So I have to exercise my authority and power and task as MC, and we got to move on to the next.
We have to move on. I'm so glad we talked about that, though. Thanks for indulging me on that one.
I think a lot of people have questions. I think most people just don't, like, I've been in RCIA sessions where like people just don't know what to say about this. Like, they just don't really talk about it. And I think it's really important that people are just honest. This doesn't really ring true to me. What work does this do? It's a totally normal question to ask. So I think I'm glad that we spent time on it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So then, the next catechesis is from March 25, and it is essentially on the hierarchy. What does the church mean by hierarchy? Why is the hierarchy important? Etc. I have lots of thoughts. Okay. Here's how I want to start this, and then I'll throw it out for what stuck out to you guys. I struggled with this, but largely because, like, the space that I'm in, I just see so much abuse of power. All the time, and I see the language of hierarchy and the language of clericalism used to justify abuse of power all the time. So for me, like, I had to really consciously read this catechesis in light of a couple of different things. First and foremost, in light of Dilexite. And there's a line from Dilexite, paragraph 84, where Pope Leo says that the church needs to be simpler and more sober, embracing the entire people of God in its presence in history. A church more closely resembling her Lord than worldly powers, and working to foster a concrete commitment on the part of all humanity to solving the immense problem of poverty in the world. Like this rejection of a worldly understanding of power as central to the church's understanding of authority and hierarchy. And then that tied so much into Pope Leo's homily on Holy Thursday during the Mass of the Lord's Supper, where he has this beautiful reflection on Jesus washing the feet of his apostles. Hierarchy cannot be about, in my mind, hierarchy cannot be about power, but it has to be about the emptying of power, the conscious embracing of powerlessness for the sake of those who are poor, for the sake of those who don't have power. And this looks like Father Maximilian Kolbe. This looks like Bishop Oscar Romero. This looks like Jesus washing the feet of his apostles. And then going into this catechesis then with that in mind, what stood out to me was all of the hierarchy is about service. It's all framed around service to the people of God. And then in the third paragraph from the end, there's the menura, that's the Latin, and it means tasks. And maybe I've just never realized that before. Task is like a right. It's not a right or a privilege. It's a responsibility. It's not something when I give my kids tasks to do for the day, they aren't happy about it. This isn't yay, we have more power. This is oh, we have more responsibility.
Yeah.
So that was my kind of wrestling through this. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, but then also obviously your thoughts on this catechesis as a whole.
Yeah. Maybe we'll go to Shaun first as I kind of formulate my thought on this.
Well, it's interesting with Munera. I've always seen it translated as gifts, but it's task. It's I Googled it because it stuck out to me, because it's always just been the gifts, the gifts given to the person.
My kids love gifts much more than tasks.
Yeah. Right. But it's it's intimately linked with service, but in its Roman context, it implies the leaders of the community doing things for the community. So it's from a position of power, but it is a gift. It is a public work, a duty, something like that. But yeah, it's interesting to me. There's definitely, this is pretty down the line catechism stuff on holy orders, right? Which is fine. I think the key, Paul, is how this gets filtered to a bunch of men in their 20s studying to be priests, right? What is your view of, because sacred power, so he says, the council thus addresses the ministry conferred upon men endowed with sacra potestas. When you hear that kind of stuff, sacra potestas, you could think of Julius Caesar, going through the forum with his face painted and all of his slaves from Gaul or something. It's not necessarily a edifying image, right? But if it's sacred power for the service of the church, Pope Francis exercised power. He had power, most of it's moral suasion, but he had power that he exercised for the marginalized, right?
Yeah.
The prophets of the Old Testament are endowed with a power. They're powerless in the sense that the king could just kill them, right? Mostly at any moment. but they have a real power
Well, I mean,
that they're exercising in a way for the marginalized, the true prophet or the true priest or whatever.
So also on Holy Thursday, Pope Leo quoted St. Oscar Romero, and for Holy Week, my wife and I and our oldest son watched the Romero movie. So like that's fresh on my mind right now. But that's the same type of thing. Like he could have been arrested. I mean, he was arrested, but he could have been killed by the government at any point. He did not exercise power in that sense. But he sacrificed himself for the sake of those who were poor to the point of giving up his life for it. But he spent years like sacrificing so much privilege and so much security also. To me, that seems the only appropriate way to exercise authority and power in the church.
Can I jump in here with a thought? Because one thing I've been thinking a lot about when it comes to the hierarchy and the priesthood in general is the double bind that it feels like we're in with the priesthood currently, at least here in our context, in the United States, that we've had this horrific sex abuse crisis and crisis of abuse of power and all that comes with that. So that's undermined the authority and the ability of priests to fulfill this call and to fulfill these tasks. Then, in response to that horrific crisis, we've had all of these boundaries put up between lay people and priests and all sorts of guardrails, protections, dividers. And I remember talking to a priest friend of mine who had been ordained maybe like 2 or 3 years before, and he was kind of having a little bit of a mental breakdown because his experience of everything was, I love these people and I can't get close to them because I'm so afraid of what will happen if I do that. I'm afraid of how they'll interpret that. I'm afraid of what might happen to me if I actually try to be in relationship with these people. And it was really heartbreaking to hear and to see this man kind of like breaking under the weight of all of this, because on the one hand, we need to have all those protections in place because they keep people safe. And on the other hand, it's kind of created this situation where priests only feel safe around priests. And so then these problems of, hey, you're disconnected with the faithful. Hey, you like don't understand. Hey, you kind of talk down to us. You like don't really get what we're going through. Hey, we don't know you, so we don't trust you. All of those things get compounded and actually get made worse by the fact that priests are siloed off from the faithful. So I've been thinking a lot about this and wondering and really praying about like what would it look like for there to be kind of a reintegration of the body of Christ, the hierarchy and the laity, the whole people of God. Because I've never been in, I mean, I've had a couple of friends who are priests, but the second they get ordained, it's like the wall goes up and there's something kind of inaccessible about them. And I don't think that's how it's supposed to be. So anyway, what do you all think about that?
What stands out to me is, so Pope Francis would rail against clericalism all the time. And he would often, when he did, he would go back to essentially saying, your baptism is more important. That's what makes you a part of the people of God. And your baptism is what makes you a brother to everyone else in the church first. Like your baptism becomes the great equalizer. Like that was the point that Francis always went back to when he talked about clericalism. And it also, like that comment and your comment also aligns with some of the research out there about clericalism talks about that it isn't just a mentality that sees the priest as set above, but it's also a mentality that sees the priest as set apart, as separate, as you said, like walled off from the rest of the people of God in some way, which I think almost always then leads to a set above, right? And it reminds me of the way that the church's teaching has developed on headship within marriage, the church has moved from the husband is the head of the household, which is language you see in like Casti Connubii in the 1930s, to John Paul II and Francis, a much more egalitarian view of marriage. Distinct roles, but equal roles. And I think that through Vatican II and some of the catecheses that Pope Leo touches on from Vatican II, of the role of the lay people of the universal call to holiness. Pope Benedict talked about co-responsibility, synodality. All of this is priests are members of the people of God with a different role, but an equal role. And they're set apart, but they also need to be deeply connected to the rest of the people of God through their baptism. And as I'm saying all of this, Sarah, I realized that all of that just remained on a level of theoretical and did not answer the actual practical question of what does this look like?
Well, no, it's I don't. We don't necessarily need to solve the practicals of it.
Because there's also a part of me that wants if I'm being honest, there's a part of me that wants the priest walled off, because most of them, I don't trust their formation and I don't trust their maturity. Not all, but it seems like that the healthy, mature priests are the exception and not the rule. If I were to be honest with myself, there's a part of me that kind of prefers them to be. I mean, I don't actually believe that that's good, but there's a part of me that does prefer that.
Yeah. And yes. And I think what I'm saying is it's a vicious cycle, and that priests would be healthier if they were just more in contact with people. How do you do that in a way that's safe and protects people too? Like, we have to do both, though. It can't be this thing where we're just putting up boundaries and guardrails, but not building bridges and building like thick social webs between our priests and their flock or the people in their parish. I just think of the like 2 priests that I know who I think you're nailing it. You've got it. Like, this is really healthy. I like what I see. I can think of 2 priests, literally. They come to mind immediately. And it's because they have deep friendship, deep relationship with the laity.
I think it's getting married. I won't. We don't need to have a debate about married priests per se, but I will just say that experiencing I got married in 2011, and experiencing Catholic life next to a woman was really eye-opening to me, because she does have a couple. One in particular, very close priest friend from our time in Baton Rouge, who you guys may have seen, Joshua Johnson, who's an amazing guy, is about our age. We're actually a little bit older than him, which was a weird experience to when you're, for the first time in your life, when you're older than the priest. That was about 10 years ago now, but and he's that first person that would pop into my mind, Sarah. I think I could name more than 2, thankfully, but
That's good.
But they have very, very, very deep, and they have deep friendships. They have healthy boundaries, but they also can be vulnerable. But they're not vulnerable to everyone. There's no doubt that, I mean, I've seen these guys that I've gotten close with speak differently to me, my wife, and to some others than they would with some parishioners, for probably all kinds of reasons. I mean, if you're in spiritual direction with someone, obviously you have a different relationship and all kinds of things. But I have found it interesting that it was a lot harder for my wife to get to know priests. I mean, they're typically not going to like randomly get lunch or get a drink with a woman alone unless they like work together. And it's like a kind of like, hey, we're at work and we're talking about RCIA. Let's just grab lunch. Like, they'll do that. But the kinds of like overtures for friendship that I received were very different.
Yeah.
then understandably, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it makes sense, but I do think that there was especially in the United States, I think there were problems in the 70s and 80s in a certain direction, and then there's been a massive overcorrection,
Mhm.
which I think is a general American societal problem. It's not just the church. It's just like we're
Yeah.
really and I've seen this so much more after moving to Australia. Like Americans, I love working with Americans right now because they say what they think, they respond to emails quickly, they're intense. I mean, but we can identify a problem and massively overcorrect it. And I worry that in formation, I think the low point of this was a couple years ago, and I actually my totally anecdotal experience, although I have some friends who teach in seminaries, is that it's getting better.
Yeah.
But I do think there was an enormous swing for all kinds of reasons. It was about anti-progressive theology. It was about the abuse crisis. It was about fears of homosexuality. It was about anxiety about low vocations. I mean, there were tons and tons of reasons why this swing happened, but the obsession with clerical authority. I mean, I remember when I was discerning the priesthood in the late 2000s,
Ooh.
I have no idea what happened there. I didn't mean to do that. Something with I sometimes go like this and then there's a sign from God that I made the wrong decision. But anyway, no, I'm really, really, really glad I didn't for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with the priesthood and to do with me. But um, there was an obsession with like the indelible mark and alter Christus, and like it was really weird. And it was a massive
Yes.
it was an overreaction to the older progressive priests who could tend towards you're this exciting coordinator of social work among your people, but you're not different. And it's like, well, I
Yeah.
mean, one thing is like, well, why would I be that? I can just be a social worker. That's a very extreme, position, but that was where that can terminate. But with I think there was way too much about, like, I remember going to a vocation discernment thing and they were like, you're a priest even in heaven. Like the indelible mark never goes away. And it's kind of like, well, does that matter in heaven? I'm like, what? Like, I remember just being like, that's so weird that you would
Yeah.
like, first of all, tell a group of 21-year-old guys after you die, you'll still be better than the laity or something. You know? Like, so anyway, I agree. Pope Leo's
This just
theology
sweeten the
here, I
deal
think
a
is
little bit.
like, I think this theology is completely correct. I think it's just a question of it can literally be what kind of psychological profile is teaching the seminarians this theology, and that can make, like, I would have no problem with Father Josh Johnson teaching this exact theology to every seminarian in the country, but I'd have a huge problem with some other guys I know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I
I'll
I
stop
don't
there.
wanna get too far afield, but can I ask another question about this while we have you? Because I just
Yeah, sure.
you have so much great stuff to share. So one of the things that, that and I have worked in seminary contexts, and one of the things that I heard a lot was, about specifically about men who are gay or who struggle with same-sex attraction or whatever kind of terminology you wanna use around that. And, that what's happening in seminaries is those men are not, if they have what's referred to as a deep-seated attraction to the same sex, they're not permitted to go on to major seminary. Well, they might be, but they have to resolve that before they can be ordained. And the sort of argument for that, the rationale for that would be because if you aren't able to be a physical father, meaning like if you don't have the aptitude for physical fatherhood, like sex with a woman and marriage or whatever, then you don't have the aptitude for spiritual fatherhood either. And I'm wondering what you think of that, because to me that has always been something that I have wrestled a little bit with. Like, okay, I guess, but I also don't necessarily find it. I'm sorry to go on record saying this, but I'm just gonna say it because you're here and we're here. I haven't necessarily found that compelling or convincing, but I would welcome your perspective on that too.
Yeah, I think that's a really weird idea. Um,
Thank you, Shaun.
Gay
Okay.
gay men do in fact have the capability of being fathers, and I know some that are physical fathers via women. Meaning like they at one point in their life had a child with a woman. So they are in fact capable of that. I think that's like grasping at straws. I think the reality is the church and society as a whole had no concept of what we now consider an orientation until like pretty recently. I mean, you get like I read about stuff in like 1800s where I'm like, they obviously mean that this person's gay.
Mhm.
They mean this person's not interested in women. They understand what that is, but they don't have it as like a kind of they don't understand it as an orientation in the sense that we do. The interesting thing for me as a Protestant convert, although now as of like a year or two, I've been Catholic longer than I've been Protestant. So I was baptized when I was 19. But the debate in conservative Protestants, at least, was um, is it sort of curable as it were? So the idea was no one's really gay. They just have some sort of hang up or wound about their father or something. And
Right.
then we can fix them. And then they really need to marry a woman to prove they're gay. They really shouldn't be single because that would be really suspicious. And this is a obviously not what all Protestants think. In the Catholic Church, it's interesting where because we have such a strong culture of not only celibacy being okay, but being actually praiseworthy. There's a space to say someone could have the official language of disordered desire, but be in a state of life that is holy. So that has like opened up this like in between space between kind of the progressive Protestants who like full affirmation of orientation and gay relationships, and then kind of pretending that no one's really gay, which is what
Yeah.
some of the conservative, not all, but some do, right? So we're in this sort of weird zone. Obviously, there are gay priests. So the argument that I was hearing, and I'm not directly in this world. I mean, I'm drawing on like friends who teach at seminaries and guests times where I visited seminaries. I'm not like directly in it. The argument I was always hearing was that if gay men go to seminary, there's a different set of temptations that for them, and then it's imprudent, but it's not like they can't ever be ordained under any circumstances. So I just think there's a lot of there really isn't a clear universal policy, and I think that the way that these papal or episcopal directives have been received. It depends on the diocese, the religious order. What does a deep-seated inclination mean? And I just think that the fatherhood, the spiritual fatherhood of the priest, I don't think is dependent upon their sexual attraction in any way. And I think there are very unhealthy gay priests, clearly, but there are also very healthy gay priests, and there are very unhealthy straight priests and very healthy straight priests. So how do you talk about your sexuality when you're supposed to be celibate for life? And there is this Catholic culture of really putting the priests, as you said earlier, in this sort of different sphere, and which I think is, when it comes to these issues, I think is really damaging. Because when inevitably a young man has temptation or problems or whatever it might be in his life, I think they feel that the answer is to hide this. Whether it's alcoholism, whether it's a relationship with a woman, whether it's a relationship with another man. And I think that this leads to all kinds of, it can lead in its worst form to like psychological breakdowns. It can lead to blackmail. I think priests can become very blackmailable because of the culture of secrecy. And all of this is unhealthy. And I don't think it's ultimately about, I just don't think that argument is I remember actually a priest who's thankfully no longer in ministry telling one of my students who was gay. I was teaching high school. This young man tells the priest that he's gay, and he says, because of your disorder, you can't be friends with men because you will objectify them sexually because it's a perverted disorder. And so you can take this stuff to like ad absurdum, right? Of like,
Yeah, it's wild.
that it's some sort of infection of your moral faculty. And I think it's not. And I would say
Yeah.
that as someone I would say marriage is between a man and a woman. I have no problem affirming that. But I don't think that we
Yeah.
then need to sort of pathologize homosexuality.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would add a couple of things to that. One is to plug my last podcast was with Dr. Julia Sadusky. She's a
That's
Catholic
awesome.
psychologist out in Colorado who does work in areas of gender and sexuality, and we have a great discussion about the origins of conversion therapy, but also the theological and psychological presumptions behind it. And they aren't Catholic, and they're not good psychology either. So even this idea that like being attracted to people of the same sex is caused by trauma or attachment issues with one of your parents and things like that, which are tropes within Protestantism, but it also have made their way deeply rooted into Catholicism.
Mhm.
That's bad Freudian psychology that isn't Catholic and isn't representative of like contemporary mainstream psychology either.
Mhm.
Also, Chris Damian had a recent podcast where he laid out the history of conversion therapy and how it's made its way into Catholicism too. And also, like, the church is an authoritative teacher in faith and morals, not psychology. So, like, I don't know. So, in this policy, like, men with deep seated homosexual desires or homosexual attraction can't um, be ordained. That seems it's if that's not a psychological statement, then it has to be talking about behavior and not about a psychological disposition. And if it is a psychological statement, it's outside of the church's authority to speak in an authoritative way about it, right? Um, so
Mhm.
I feel like there's legitimate room for disagreement on that policy.
And it's again, it's an overreaction, right? Because there was a real problem in some seminaries. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
I've heard I've heard outrageous things, but I've also heard things like straight young men showing up and being like, "This is not a place for me." I've felt that in a couple Catholic contexts. I won't say which, where it was like, "This group is for this type of person," or the way that this is
Yeah. Yeah.
clearly the way this is organized is there.
Yeah.
No one's discerning marriage here in a certain way, right? Um,
Mhm.
so that's not. I mean, I think what Pope Francis, and he spoke very intemperately at times. I mean, he used some inflammatory language sometimes about sort of the drunk grandpa at Thanksgiving language sometimes about this question. But I think he was pointing to a reality of there shouldn't be a a subculture shouldn't dominate the seminary in a certain way, and I think that's valid. But I would never ever want to say people who have a certain orientation are somehow shut off from spiritual gifts and spiritual fatherhood. I think that would be a huge overreaction.
Yeah.
I think they're grasping at straws because they want to ban gay men and they don't know how to justify it. So I think
Yeah.
they're grasping at
Well,
straws.
it is what it feels like, and it's never felt coherent to me to just say kind of de facto gay men are disqualified from the priesthood, but I actually do. I mean, I don't know this for sure, but I do believe that something like what I articulated there is in the program of priestly formation in the United States. So it's I and I should confirm that, but anyway,
No, I've
just
no
kind of
doubt. I've no doubt you're right about that. Yeah.
I'm grateful to kind of think out loud about that because it's always struck me as a little bit strange. Not yeah. So
Uh,
that was a tangent.
yeah,
Sorry.
no, that's okay. We're behind. I don't know. We can keep going. Let's look at the next catechesis. Um, I didn't have many notes.
No notes.
I mean,
This was
I have some notes, but not like major notes. So this is on
the
um,
laity.
on the laity. The thing that stood out to me was I loved how he goes out of his way to say that the council went out of its way
Mhm.
to define lay people in positive terms rather than just being people who aren't ordained.
Yes.
That
Yep.
they're like, oh no, this is like you are the people of God. And you have a particular identity, you have a particular mission. And the council and the magisterial teaching after goes out of its way to articulate what that identity and mission are.
Yep.
So yeah, Shaun, Sarah, what stood out to you guys from this one?
For me, this one was great, but as you said, Shaun, earlier, this one was a little bit boilerplate for me. I thought it was great. And no notes as well. Just really good stuff.
Yeah, I think just the idea of I find myself slipping into this when I'm teaching. Like I teach Catholic social thought at Notre Dame, Australia, and I'll have students from every single background. I mean, some very devout Catholics, some cultural, other religions, no religion, whatever. So I'll just define very basic things like Pope, Bishop, Priest, Nun, and I do have to catch myself with laity being, well, none of those things, right? Or not having
Yeah.
any of this special, So when he says explaining in the positive terms, I mean, we have to try to fight against the default that we have of like lay people are just they don't have the extra mana points or something that everyone else has. But I think this is I think the reception of Vatican II, which is fraught in many ways, I think despite the problems with clericalism that you both have experienced and pointed to, there is a positive conciliar reception from many, many different quarters. From, I say to my students, Opus Dei to liberation theology, a positive conception of the activity of the laity, I think is a real, the fact that we have nothing to say about this might, in a sense, be a confirmation that it's
Yeah.
actually been really successful.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, we've seen this, so that's maybe a sign of hope.
Yeah.
Yes. I agree.
So we'll jump to the last one.
Yeah.
So holiness and the evangelical councils. The thing that stood out to me is, I wish she would use the word theosis more, because that's what this catechesis is about. Like, you just like substitute the word holiness and transformation with theosis. And he hits on a point. This is like the third paragraph from the end, a short paragraph. He says, "Therefore, holiness does not only have a practical nature, as if it were reducible to an ethical commitment, however great, but concerns the very essence of Christian life, both personal and communal." Like, this is theosis. Holiness isn't about just being a good person or making the right choices or, like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and like grinding your way through life, gritting your teeth. It means being transformed into another Christ. Yeah. So I'll throw it back to you guys. That was the main thing that stood out to me.
Yes, that was also my highlight from this address. And it just made me think so much of seasons in my life when I was younger, when my concept of holiness had so much to do with performance and accomplishment and like a checklist. And literally, I mean, I was given this checklist from a priest in college, and it had like, these are the things, like, this is the way of holiness, or there's something like that. And the list is like 1 holy hour a day, 1 half hour of spiritual reading a day, 1 rosary a day, 1 divine mercy chaplet a day, examination of conscience, mass every day, like all these things you were supposed to do every day. And this was sort of put forward as like, this is how you live a holy life. And then on top of that, of course, like, you're never going to put salt on your food, and you're like never going to drink again, and like all this
Was
other
was the no salt thing a Jose Maria thing? Is
no,
that
no, adjacent.
Okay.
No, but yeah, so, and I think about how like truly liberating it has been in my life to sort of, to not reject all of those good things that I was being encouraged to do, but to reject the sort of, here's the bundle of things you have to do to be good, and instead taking this approach, the approach that's laid out here, the Christian approach, rather than like the Pelagian approach, which is that God works in us for our holiness. And fundamentally, it's conversion, it's clinging to the person of Christ, it's trust in him, and then it's just yielding to his grace. And that's the life of holiness. It's not like this white knuckling thing. And it sounds kind of obvious to say it now, but I lived so many years of my life thinking about holiness as do these things all the time without fail, and then you'll be holy. And Paul, you and I have talked about like the bureaucrat God before, like the God who's just, no, maybe that wasn't you. But it probably was. But the God who's like, yeah, he's it's like going to the DMV and it's like, oops, I forgot a copy of the Treaty of Versailles today, so I can't get my license renewed or whatever. So like that image of God who's just looking for us to fail. You've talked about that a lot, Paul, as kind of a false image of God versus a God who really embraces us and like desires for us to be transformed.
So I want to juxtapose the distorted view of holiness that you just described that I certainly resonate with, and I imagine a lot of people resonate with a line from Pope Leo's homily, Holy Thursday. He says this,
Yeah.
It becomes clear that the Lord's love precedes our own goodness or purity. He loves us first, and in that love, he forgives and restores us. His love is not a reward for our acceptance of his mercy. Instead, he loves us and therefore cleanses us, thereby enabling us to respond to his love. It's all God first. Everything is God first.
Mm-hmm.
Even the desire to be holy is a gift from God first.
Yes. Amen.
What you shared reminds me this is probably 8 years ago now. I had been in parish ministry for several years at this point, and there was the Curia would have meetings with lay staff, annually or whatever. And I think they maybe had just read the Soul of the Apostolate or whatever, and they had this vision of, okay, you can't be evangelizer unless you have a life of holiness. Which, yeah, that totally makes sense. That's a pretty basic principle. They gave this presentation, and I was pretty irked because, like, Pope Francis had written Evangelii Gaudium at that point, and Gaudete et Exsultate on evangelization and on holiness, and they cite Pope Francis 0 times in their whole presentation. I'm like, guys, why are you citing JP2 from 30 years ago? Francis just wrote this. Anyways, and then in it, they hand us this list, and they're like, and this is what us in the Curia we've committed to as this like model for holiness. And it was like going to mass 3 times a week, making a holy hour every month, saying a rosary every day, having 30 minutes of silent prayer every day, doing the Angelus every day. And it was like this whole list. And I'm like, I had talks with multiple people in the Curia afterwards. I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, how come you didn't invite us to actually ask the Lord what he's wanting to do in our lives? How come you didn't propose this to us and then invite us to go and grow in the way the Lord wants us to grow? Instead, you gave us this freaking checklist. And it just reinforces that mentality you just described, of like, I am not a good enough church employee unless I'm going to mass 3 times a week and saying a rosary every day. And like, how dare I present myself as a lay minister unless, I check all the boxes, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with any of those things. Again, but one thing I really feel that I have learned from you, Paul, is the importance of helping people discern the things to do. Like everybody should kind of have their own way of living Catholicism and their own sort of rule of life. Like that's a good thing. And at certain seasons, you have little kids, it might be a little bit more basic. You get the basic plan and then you can upgrade when they go to school or whatever. But yeah, just the importance of discernment for that. I don't want to harp on it because I think we all understand what's kind of the problem with that. But yeah.
Shaun, you've
I
never lived to checklist Catholicism before, have you?
well, I'm sure I did fall into it in certain ways. I mean, I was around it tremendously, and a lot of these people are amazing, wonderful people who I'm sure are growing and developing. And I remember I was a campus minister in Madison, Wisconsin for a year, and there was an amazing community there, but also definitely a lot of kind of rigidity, or at least the temptation was rigidity more than laxity. We'll put it that way. For everything but drinking, drinking, having a lot to drink at the fish fry, with passing boots around and everything, which was for a Protestant from North Carolina very liberating. But I remember this young woman. I mean, she was probably only a couple years younger than me, but she was really agitated about having a class that began at 8 a.m. I think, because that was like she would have to leave the holy hour at 7:40 or something. And the priests would would have a holy hour, and then they would pray the office, and then everyone would go off to their classes. There was a large contingent doing this, which is great. But
Yeah.
she was very, very disturbed and said, well, they're telling me I have to take this class for my nursing degree or whatever it was. And I just said, look, is this practice something that is reasonable for you to continue in your career? And you say you want to get married and have kids when you're a mom, like, obviously not, right? You're obviously not going to be doing a 7 to 8. You're not going to be driving to a parish at 6:40, sitting there for an hour, then praying the office, then dropping your kid off at preschool, or being with your infant, or going to your
Yep.
job, or whatever you're doing in your life, right?
No,
She's like,
I'm sure.
yeah,
I'm sure Sarah does that twice a
No,
day.
yeah, I have all my kids out the door.
like the question, Sarah, is like, can I even get to the Holy Thursday Mass, or can I? You know what I mean? So like, and I think she was sort of relieved by that, but it's a lot of this is like empowerment of laity. The intention is like the laity are just as holy as the priests, but it's also like, it's actually like a subtle clericalization of the laity, because a
Yes,
priest
because
saying, like, Father Josh will have, to use an example, I saw someone in the comments mention him as well. He's this amazing guy, but like, he can do a holy hour every day. I mean, he's busy. Don't get me wrong. He's really busy, and he makes a lot of sacrifices, but like, he doesn't have kids. He doesn't have a partner. He doesn't have, he- his job, because he's done all these other things really well, like fundraising and hiring good people. But like, his job is to be the guy that's in the church, and the guy that's available, and the guy that's leading the rosary or hearing confessions. Like, that's not Sarah's job right now at your stage of life. That's not Paul's job right now at his stage of life. So I think that maybe receiving this theology of the laity also, of what do we mean by lay holiness?
yeah,
And it's going to be different from a nun or a priest, right?
yeah,
And
I-
the idea of holiness as Christ. Like, I don't like when people. I got to be honest. It's probably bad, but if I hear a lot of like holiness rhetoric, I get really nervous. It might be from
mhm,
my Protestant background, where the set apartness from the culture, and it meant certain things about how you dress and what movies you watch. Maybe that's
yeah,
why I'm sort of allergic to it. But holiness in the Old Testament is being close to God
yeah,
and like God, and in the New Testament it's being like Jesus.
mhm,
It's not it yeah, so that, in that sense, it can be stated positively.
Yeah,
yeah. I'm very grateful for what you said. That's so good.
there was. I mean, this was several years ago now. And my wife was reading. It was probably around the same, same time in my life as this meeting. She'd read a reflection. I forget where it was from, but it was talking about living monastic life in the family. And it could have gone the route of, here's how to live like a monk and pray the liturgy of the hours and like all these things. But instead it just had this language of like, um, in the Abbey, when the bell rings to pray, you drop what you're doing. Like if you're gardening, you drop your tools, you leave
Yeah.
it there, and you go and you pray. And it said, like, the monks didn't have kids who demanded their attention. Like you're doing the
Right.
dishes and your baby wakes up from their nap a half hour early, you drop the dishes and you go and get the baby.
Right.
So they had to manufacture bells, right? And it was the sense of like, yeah, the demands of domestic life as a layperson aren't any less than the demands of monastic
Right,
life,
right.
and it doesn't need to look like monastic life. In fact, maybe a monastic life is trying to manufacture the asceticism of domestic life. Yeah, and I found that to be liberating, but
Yeah.
I found it to be truthful.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and
We
ultimately, it's love. It's like, am I willing to lay down my life for the other?
we are way over time. Any
Yeah.
final thoughts from either of you about like any of these catecheses? And we got to none of the news, none of the Trump
Ah,
stuff, none of the war stuff, none of it.
probably
Just
good.
the catecheses.
I have one final anecdote, really quick anecdote, from the early modern period, because this problem that Sarah's describing is old. And there's this amazing Italian priest named Ludovico Muratori who wrote this like handbook of devotion, and he's trying to fight the exact problem that Sarah was talking about in 1740s Italy. And he references this story about these Jewish converts, hopefully willing converts, but you never know because it was Spain in the early modern period. And they converted to Catholicism, and they said something like, you guys told us we had a lot of rules. Like we we didn't have this many rules, and he's sort of saying like what an embarrassment to the gospel that like they felt more sort of in bondage of sort of patterns and rules that are external. Because he's trying to say going to daily mass is beautiful if you can, to praying, but maybe you're a housewife, maybe you're a laborer in the field, maybe you're a servant at the Duke's palace,
Mm,
whatever you are, like just be holy in that context and don't be so anxious to be
yeah.
like me, a priest, and it's a really beautiful, it's called the regulated devotion of a Christian. But it's
Oh
just this
gosh.
hilarious thing where
I like the name.
you just imagine these Spanish Jews being like, God, wait, we can't eat meat on Wednesday as well as for like what's going on?
We
So
thought this
anyway,
was gonna be fun.
it's an old problem, Sarah. So
Yeah.
I'm sure it ebbs and flows. We correct, we overcorrect,
Yeah, of
and
course. And
a lot of these people's like their intentions are really good. Like I'm sure the people that we went to college with, like they were like, this was so important to me as a young person. I had discipline.
yeah,
And my life really. But the problem is you can't impose what worked for you on another person,
yeah.
and that's where it
Yeah,
becomes a
and to
problem.
be honest, like, those things were helpful for me too
Yeah.
in that time
Yeah,
because I had the
yeah,
time, I had the flexibility. It was really good for me to be focused on those things and to build those habits. So I would never say like, "Oh, I should never have done that. I should never have tried
right.
to." But it's just more like, "Oh, I really got a rigid way of thinking about
Mhm.
that then didn't work anymore when life started to get a little more complicated." But it's a lot more uncomfortable to, like, believe God when he says that, um or just, like, believe the gospel that, like, it's accomplished by Christ. Like,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
war
yeah.
is won, and, it's a lot easier to be like, "Well, I'm gonna do all these things and make sure and be safe and be good."
Yeah. And it's interesting too, like this last catechesis. So, it's on holiness, but it's also on the evangelical councils. The first one being love. He's like the highest uh um I'm not seeing the line, so I'm not gonna spend time looking for it. But he puts charity, rightly so, in the center of everything. Like concrete love of others. That's the
Yeah.
sign of holiness. That's the way we grow in holiness, not the checklist. And it's a high demand. And he talks about like martyrdom being the highest sign of holiness, and that lay people at times may be called to martyrdom out of love. So
Mhm.
it's not a watering down,
No, no.
but rather it's a personal. It's a what's the Lord asking me to do? Not
Right.
am I following the checklist that so and so told me I needed to follow 7 years ago.
Mhm. I think we just need to do a part 2, guys. We need to get back together and do this
Uh,
again.
I'd be happy to.
but this was great. Shaun, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you,
Thank you
Sean.
guys. I
Seriously, it
enjoyed
was
it.
It was awesome having you. I feel like I learned a lot and yeah, just
Well, I
felt
I
very
love
blessed.
I've enjoyed your episodes, and I have learned a lot from you too, so I really appreciate it.
Please come back.
Will do.
Excellent. Okay,
All
everyone,
right.
have a great night.
Blessings, everybody.
Take care.